Let's turn this morning, if I got everything on, yes, to Isaiah chapter 40, where we will not read verses 1 through 11, but rather we will read verses 12 through 20. Isaiah 40, verses 12 through 20. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, and marked off the heavens with a span, enclosed the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in scales and the hills in a balance? Who has measured the Spirit of the Lord, or what man shows him his counsel? Whom did he consult, and who made him understand? Who taught him the path of justice, and taught him knowledge, and showed him the way of understanding? Behold, the nations are like a drop from a bucket, and are accounted as the dust on the scales. Behold, he takes up the coastlands like fine dust. Lebanon would not suffice for fuel, nor are its beasts enough for a burnt offering. All the nations are as nothing before him. They are accounted by him as less than nothing and emptiness. To whom then will you liken God, or what likeness compare with him? An idol. A craftsman casts it, and a goldsmith overlays it with gold, and casts for it silver chains. He who is too impoverished for an offering chooses wood that will not rot. He seeks out a skillful craftsman to set up an idol that will not move. And now may the Lord bless this reading of his word this morning in our hearing. There's been a children's song running through my head all week long as I've been working on this passage. It goes like this, and you probably know the tune. I'm not going to sing it, but you'll recognize it, I think. My God is so big, so strong and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do. And I think you repeat that once or twice, and then it goes, the mountains are his, the rivers are his, the stars are his handiwork too. And back, my God is so big, so strong and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do. And that pretty much captures our passage's main point this morning. Now, Isaiah's version might be, a little bit more sophisticated, and his version is shaped for a particular historical context, yet the two are very much alike. Because what Isaiah is saying here to the exiles is, appearances to the contrary. After all, the popular perception is Babylon's gods can beat up our God. It's only been 70 years since the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple when the exiles begin to make their way back. There are people who are witnesses of the building of another temple, and because they can remember Solomon's temple, they're dejected at what a poor representation this is compared to the original. In other words, it's fresh in the cultural memory that Babylon beat up our God. But the truth is that our God is really big, He is really strong, and He is really, really mighty. and He can accomplish all His holy will. And of course, it is a misreading of history to boil it down to something as simple as Babylon's God can beat up Israel's God. There were reasons attached to God's, if you will, humiliation in the world at watching the Babylonian gods trample His city into the dust. This is important because if God says He can come to Babylon and set us free, and if God says that He can lead us back across this dangerous and desolate wilderness to His land, and if God says He will restore to us all the former glory that we enjoyed and make that glory permanent so that it is beyond the possibility of ever losing it again, who is going to say no to that? Who can say, stop right there. You can go no further. What alliance of gods and men in this world can put up a roadblock or set up an ambush to ensure that the exiles stay exactly where they are in their captivity? Who can build a big enough wall to keep them on the eastern side so that they can't cross to the western side? Well, if the answer seems obvious to you, no one, then your theology is in pretty good health. But as we'll see over the coming weeks in Isaiah 40 through 48, good theology has, at least for the duration of this present age, a nasty rival called idolatry, which in pop culture terms is the kryptonite to good Superman. It shouldn't be deadly. I mean, Superman can hold like a hydrogen bomb and have it blow up and he's okay. And yet these little green rocks that don't look very deadly at all, in fact, humans can pick them up and do whatever they want with them. Yet when good theology is exposed for long periods of time to idolatry, it grows weaker. It grows less stable. And the power of good theology to protect God's people is sapped. And it's no longer the defense that it should be. As we'll see, idolatry is not simply a thing of the past, nor is it a part of the religion in just the developing world, though we do find it there in more literal terms. Idolatry is more sinister than that. It evolves and adapts to new situations, so its forms may change, even to the point of actually dropping forms, that is, dropping actual images. But its power to do harm to the church remains. And that's where Isaiah's doctrine of the living and the true God comes in, to stand as a buttress against prevailing idolatry, to challenge it, to usurp it, to overcome it, and ultimately. And that brings me to my first point this morning. God is willing to save us. But is He able to save us? God is willing to save us, but is He able to save us? Isaiah's prologue to chapters 40 through 66 effectively answered two important questions. What is God going to do for us? And why is God going to do what He is going to do for us? So it answers the what and the why. The what is God is coming to save His people. He is going to bring an end to our exile, and these can't be separated. He is going to bring an end to our exile, and He is going to bring us back to Zion, where He will be our God and we will be His people. It is semi-Pelagian, I suppose, thinking of this morning's Sunday school, to believe that God can deliver us from exile, but whether He can actually bring us all the way back to Zion and accomplish His purpose remains sort of up in the air. That is not Isaiah's view of salvation. This salvation is not just a release from captivity. It is a full-scale relocation, just as Paul says in Colossians. And it is not just a relocation, it is a new and never-changing relationship that will go on and on into the ages. Now here I'm going to pause and insert a brief reminder, and I'm going to do this occasionally to make sure we're all on the same page. How I'm thinking about Isaiah in this part of his book, that national Israel's actual, literal, and historical return to Jerusalem from Babylon in history, roughly 535 or so, is at the same time a grand metaphor for true Israel's return to a new and heavenly Eden. That's how I'm working with Isaiah. Metaphor is the key to understanding all of this. Metaphor, a word or phrase, and I will add a person, a place, an event, for one thing that is used to refer to another thing in order to show or suggest that they are similar. Metaphors are so common in our communication experience that you're using them all the time without even if you didn't know what a metaphor was, by dictionary definition, you are using them constantly. We might say something like this. General Custer at the Little Bighorn finally met his Waterloo. Does that sound familiar? Waterloo, of course, is a reference to Napoleon's defeat in Belgium, I think, under facing the Duke of Wellington. His last and final humiliation. It's a historical event. But now we can take that historical event and sort of apply it to other situations that in one way or another resemble that great defeat at Waterloo. That's metaphor. We do it all the time. So whenever I'm talking about Isaiah and the return of the captives to Jerusalem, I'm in a sense simultaneously talking about our return from east of Eden, our return back to God. So we're almost talking about two events. Why the why is important. We've looked at the what and we've looked at the why, but the why is important as what, because what we discovered in the prologue is God is coming to save His people because He loves them. Because He loves them. So Isaiah begins this comfort. Comfort my people. No, speak tenderly. Your servitude is over. Your iniquity is pardoned. Or as Hosea, Isaiah's fellow prophet in the north, put it, we heard it this morning, therefore, behold, I will allure her and bring her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. And in that day, Yahweh declares, you will call me my husband, and no longer will you call me my Baal. So why is God coming for us? Why is He coming to rescue us? Because He's under some sense of obligation? Because it's the least He can do? No, it's because He loves us and yearns for us and wants the very best for us. And what is the very best for us but God Himself, and to live with Him in His presence? But good intentions are not enough. Good intentions are just that. They are intentions that are good. They are well-meaning. But there remains a sizable gap between the sincerest promise, the intention, and its accomplishment. I'm promising Marcia that I will build her dream house overlooking the Mediterranean on the coast of Greece. I'm so sincere about that. And I'm going to do it with my own two hands. Well, the what is your dream house on the Mediterranean off the coast of Greece. The why is because I love my wife and I want to see her happy. But can I really do that? No. No, I can't. There's a third and yet to be answered question in Isaiah 40. How? How are you going to do this, God? Because all the love in the world and all the sincerest promises simply cannot guarantee success or fulfillment. And really, not just Isaiah 40, but Isaiah 40 through 48 answers the how. So for Isaiah, this is the moment to present the true God to His people. Or maybe it's better to say to reintroduce them to Yahweh in order to provide them, and then to provide us, with resources, good theology, to enable us to resist and turn from idols that we may put our trust in Him. And that brings me to my second this morning. The true God versus the gods and idols. The true God versus the gods and idols. Verses 18 through 20. To whom then will you liken God, or what likeness compare with Him? An idol. A craftsman casts it, and a goldsmith overlays it with gold and casts for it silver chains. He who is too impoverished for an offering chooses wood that will not rot. He seeks out a skillful craftsman to set up an idol that will not move. This will be a reoccurring theme in Isaiah, where he basically indulges in sort of this rich sarcasm to expose the internal foolishness, silliness of idolatry. Even, if you will, apart from a knowledge of the true God, the system by itself simply doesn't make sense. It's absurd. But for now, we'll simply point out that as far as Isaiah is concerned, God has no rivals. But as far as the people are concerned, God has rivals. They are not rivals in any meaningful sense of the word. That is, they're not equal. They're not sort of competitors in a genuine sense. There's no real competition between them. But they are rivals in our own religion, our own imagination, and in our affections. 2 years back, I opened Romans 1 before a group of Christians. And before we read it, I asked them all, what do you think is fallen humanity's chief sin? It's not an entirely fair question. We don't think that, there's sort of some descending list of sins where, number 8 is so much better than number 3. But in a sense, what's the fountain? What's the beginning of all other types of transgressions and forms of disobedience? What's at the top? And I got a whole list, and all the usual suspects, and of course, sexual immorality is always at the top of everyone's list. But oddly, they skipped the very first one in Romans chapter 1. Idolatry. Worshipping the images or worshipping false gods through images. In other words, you worship the image or you're worshiping a false god via the image. And here is Romans 1. And it's a text we should be well acquainted with because it says so much about what humanity is apart from God's saving work in Christ. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. This sort of picks at some popular ideas that people throughout the world and who have not come into contact with the Christian church are entirely and innocently ignorant of the true God. Paul says, by their unrighteousness they suppress truth. I ask, what truth are they suppressing? For what can be known about God is plain to them. Well, why is it plain to them, Paul? Because God has shown it to them. Let me explain this further, he says. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived. Did you say clearly perceived, Paul, or did you say barely? No, clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so that they are without excuse. For, maybe more clearly, because although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God, is the immortal God that they knew, and to reveal his glory was clearly perceived. They exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds, animals, and creeping things. Therefore, God gave them up in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves. Why? Because they exchanged the truth about God, that is, they suppressed it by their unrighteousness, for a lie. And they worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. They worshipped and served, and the word for serve there is latruo, from which we get liturgy, the service of God, the religious service of God. Now, of course, my other chief sin is pride. Maybe we could almost say that pride is kind of the inside sin, and its immediate manifestation is idolatry. That is the refusal to worship the God that we know and whose invisible attributes are clearly perceived. Idolatry is where Romans 1 is. You'll recall that when God took Israel to be his wife at Mount Sinai, not surprisingly, he insisted first and foremost on a monogamous marriage. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. For I, Yahweh your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. But Israel, though it was redeemed from Egypt, had not yet been redeemed from Adam. Which really means, look, you know, I'm not into this whole monogamous lifestyle thing. I really need more than one God to take care of me, if you get what I mean. And so, in one of the most surprising juxtapositions in the whole story of redemption, while Moses is up on the mountain in the presence of God and receiving from God, including from his very finger, the law of God, something else is going down at the base of the mountain. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron. After all, he's the religious guy, right? He's the top religious guy, and said to him, "Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what has become of him." So Aaron said to them, "Take off the rings of gold that are in the ears of your wives, your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took off the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. He's a priest after all. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, now listen to the proclamation. This is what's so remarkable about this event. "Tomorrow shall be a feast to Yahweh." That is, as we dedicate this idol and say, this is the idol that took us out of Egypt, we are going to have a feast to Yahweh. And they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. And they rose up to play. They didn't play tag and volleyball, according to the tradition, of course, often associated with idolatry as sexual immorality. Well, this story, which is at the heart of Israel's story, confirms an old proverb that I made up this week. You can take a people out from idolatry, but you can't take the idolatry out of the people. And really, in one way, you can sum up redemptive history by calling it God's long war against the idols, even the idols in his own holy land. Now, we are in Jesus Christ, and we are no longer in Adam or in Romans 1. But, as one of our hymns says, we are still prone to wander, prone to leave the God we love, especially when our new monogamy and all the excitement that surrounds it begins to wear off and starts to get old. And then we start going to Facebook and looking for those old idols and all the good times that they used to provide with their gifts and their promises to love us and to take care of us, knowing they say, we knew you'd never be happy with just one God, no matter how good and reliable he is. And so what we need, and I think regularly need, is in our third point this morning. Israel needs a fresh revelation of the true God. Israel needs a fresh revelation of the true God. And if you're following the metaphor, we need a fresh revelation of the true God. And that's exactly what Isaiah has for them. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, and marked off the heavens with a span, enclosed the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in scales and the hills in a balance? Who has measured the Spirit of Yahweh? Or what man shows him his counsel? Whom did he consult? And who made him understand? Who taught him the path of justice, and taught him knowledge, and showed him the way of understanding? Behold, the nations are they're like a drop from a bucket, and are accounted as the dust on the scales. Behold, he takes up the coastlands like fine dust. Lebanon would not suffice for fuel, nor are its beasts enough for a burnt offering. All the nations are as nothing before him. They are accounted by him as less than nothing and emptiness. So Israel and we need to discover, or maybe in a sense to discover again for the very first time, that our God is so big and so strong and so mighty, and there is nothing my God cannot do. Now I say fresh revelation and not new revelation, because it's not as if God has kept this hidden in the past. From literally page 1, God has revealed himself to be big and strong and mighty, and there is nothing that he cannot do. But it's fresh in the sense that he is revealing himself again in a brand new redemptive historical situation, a brand new occasion or event. And therefore it's adapted to the moment, the return from exile, and it is fitted especially to cover over our weak faith. Though there is new revelation coming, I say, for on. This is necessary for two reasons at least. First, God didn't acquit himself very well the last time around. I mean, the Babylonians just came in, they took our king, they put out his eyes, but before they did that, they killed all of his sons in his presence. Then he came and he took God's house. God can't even defend his house. You take that bad memory, that human misunderstanding of what God's purposes were, and combine it with the fact that the Jews by this point have been soaking in Babylonian idolatry for 70 years. Babylon has their own creation story. Babylon has their own pantheon of gods. Babylon has everything a religious person could want. And by holding Israel captive, this is an effective way of saying, ours is the true religion. Put yourself back in their sandals and appreciate how people measured their perception of God, particularly in an idolatrous world. God proves himself to be just the best God, because nobody believes that there's just one God. And he does it by coming through for his people. It's that simple. But Isaiah comes and he says to them, our God is so big. He's so strong. He's so mighty that, well, let me put it this way. Step outside of your apartment and look all around you in every direction for as far as your eyes can see. And when you're done with that, look up into the sky, look up into the night sky, try and perceive the number of stars that are up there. Watch the sun go round the earth, if that's how they perceived it then. See how the moon appears every evening on a kind of regular cycle. And remember, God built that. Picture God, if you will, as if he had one of those little pencils behind his ears. He's got his tools out, and like a good carpenter, he assembled this whole glorious reality. In fact, God is so great, he didn't have to go to Home Depot to buy the raw materials. He made the raw materials. In fact, he made them out of, well, nothing. Isaiah says, you should have been there the day he put Mount Hermon on the scales, weighing it against like Mount Tabor over here. It was crazy. This is your God, Israel. Have you forgotten that? Our God is so big and so strong and so mighty that, well, you know when you go down to the grocer to buy your oranges, and while he's got them on the scales, weighing them out, you see that there's this little bit of dirt that favors the seller and not the buyer. And the honest grocer, oh, I'm sorry, sir, and blows it off. Yeah, that dirt's like the nations to God. Just that little speck there. God sees entire nations like you see that dirt. As if they're nothing but maybe one drop of water in a big, big jar. Well, you say, wow, wait a minute, whoa. How can anyone ever worship a God who is so big and so strong and so mighty? And Isaiah says, do you remember the story of Gulliver's Travels? When Gulliver lived among the Lilliputians, he was a giant to them. Well, as Gulliver recalls the story, he says, the emperor of the Lilliputians stipulates to allow me a quantity of meat and drink sufficient for the support of 1,724 Lilliputians. That's my day's meal. And it includes at least 6 cows and 40 sheep. Well, it's kind of like that, says Isaiah. Lebanon, which is renowned in the ancient world for the richness of its cedar and its greenness and agricultural productivity. Lebanon, by itself, might be able to provide enough wood and enough animals for one sacrifice. But maybe not. Lebanon would not suffice for fuel, nor are its beasts enough for a burnt offering. Now this may sound, a little silly and simplistic, but in a sense, Isaiah seems to be saying that if you want to grasp how big and strong and mighty God is, then picture him as a giant. That is, picture him as literally immense. I mean, if God built the cosmos like a carpenter builds a house, and if God sees whole nations like we see specks of dust, and if it takes the entire country of Lebanon to maybe cover possibly just one burnt offering, then ask yourself this: to whom then will you liken God? Or what likeness compare with him? There's only one choice: the idol. But a craftsman casts it, and a goldsmith overlays it with gold and casts for it silver chains. God is huge. And so God is both willing and fully able to save us out of his great love for us. There should be no doubts. Now, back in the 50s, there was an enormously popular Christian book written by an Anglican minister named J.B. Phillips, I think. Your God is Too Small. I've not read the book, but the title has been so frequently referred to that it's really almost found a place in the Christian lexicon. Well, apparently, what the author does in this very short book is he presents all different versions of God that in fact are not really the God of the Bible. So, all sorts of gods, versions of the biblical God that we might find in our Western culture. And I think this leads us to an important question. How can we, that is, we Western Christians, apply these various idolatry passages in the Old Testament? And of course, they're not only in the Old Testament. Because look, I'm candid enough to confess that I struggle against all kinds of sins. But I don't have a statue in my basement that I fall back on in prayer when God doesn't seem to be doing what he should be doing. That is, literal idolatry is not usually in my temptation circle. So I want to speak to this question now because we're going to return to more and more idol passages in Isaiah 40 through 48. Now, one popular approach to idolatry is to turn idolatry into a metaphor, right? So our modern idols aren't statues of creatures or creeping things or human beings made out of wood or stone. They are either material things like, our accumulated wealth, we're prone to trust in it, our collection of electronic gadgets, whatever it may be, or they're the non-material things that give us worth and meaning, status in society, success in life, where we find fulfillment. So anything in our lives that is a God to us, that is, we trust it, we give it first place. In that sense, we kind of worship and serve it. That's idolatry. Now, Now, at times I think this can be a bit overdone, but this is exactly what Paul says in the New Testament. When Paul says covetousness is idolatry. So in Ephesians 5:5, he says, the covetous person is an idolater. Not is like an idolater, that would be a simile. And in Colossians 3:5, put to death covetousness, which is idolatry. And then we think of what Jesus taught about the god Mammon, representing wealth and status. So we have it on the very best authority that desiring the things that God the Creator has not given to us is idolatry. Desiring things that is covetousness that God the Creator has not given to us is idolatry. In a sense, worshiping and serving the created thing and not the creator. Let me add a second idolatry, because we'll be using both as we continue on. And I think this one is as common, but not as widely identified. Worshiping and this is the idolatry, worshiping and serving the biblical God as we have reimagined Him. Worshiping and serving the biblical God as we have reimagined Him. Let me put this another way. We Christians, by virtue of our union with Christ, the true God as our God. But the crippling idolatry is that we do not accept Him as He represents Himself to us, especially as He represents Himself to us in Jesus Christ. And so, despite the revelation in Scripture, our own mental pictures of the biblical God isn't, in fact, say, a loving who, with wisdom and power, freed us and forgave us in Christ. And He's more like my dad. And not my dad. Actually, my dad was actually a loving father who, with wisdom and power, took care of me all his life, as Marcia will testify. So, I want to get that right for the tape. Instead, my father is a big, petulant, impatient, exasperated with us old man. Parenthesis, just like my dad and his dad and my uncle. That is, maybe he is a giant version of the people who were important to us, but who failed us. Or maybe he's a giant version of you. That is, you imagine God to be like you, and you don't like that God. That's very interesting. God is like you in a mirror, only as it was with the idols in the ancient world and the false gods of the ancient world, they were all exaggerated versions of human beings. You're conflicted. The words on the page say this, but you, quote, know in your heart that God is more like this. So yes, you will confess with all of us here that my God is so big and so strong and so mighty, and you will confess that there is nothing my God cannot do, but with the footnote, except forgive me, persevere with me, treat me as a father, or stop punishing me. That's the part you don't say out loud. You see it? Maybe that's sort of what Aaron is doing. Here's the golden calf. Let's have a feast to Yahweh, using the true redemptive God's name for an idol. There are real gold or silver or wood or stone idols in our world, just not so much in our wing of it. So for us, serving the wrong God may mean serving the true God wrongly. And that's idolatry too. Our God is. Likened him to being a giant. But ultimately that's misleading. It only works a little bit. Yes, God is infinitely greater than all the so-called gods. He's a spirit. He has no body. He's beyond measure. What we mustn't do, and this is so important in Isaiah, we mustn't see him as little, a bigger God. Who has measured the Spirit of Yahweh? Or what man shows him his counsel? Whom did he consult? And who made him understand? Who taught him the path of justice? And showed him the way of understanding? People make idols. God makes people. And not only is he entirely and completely independent of them, they are entirely and completely dependent upon him, in whom we live and move and have our being. He needs nothing. We have nothing to give to him except what he is pleased in his graciousness and goodness to accept from us. He is the source of all that is good and right in his world, even in its fallen and wretched condition. People make idols, and then they teach their idols how to be gods. You see, I will bring you this number of grapes, and you, in turn, will give to me a good harvest. Okay? But God makes people, and he teaches them how to be truly human. Because all wisdom and all knowledge and every virtue resides in him as he is. No one has ever instructed God in what justice and righteousness really look like. God is not our united human imagination now set down in writing. Rather, he imparts to us, his humans, justice and understanding and wisdom, so that we may in turn glorify him. And now Jesus Christ has become to us wisdom from God. It is our Lord Jesus Christ who is so big and so strong and so mighty. He is both willing and able to save us, moved as he is by his great love for us. Let us pray. Our Heavenly Father, first we thank you for the rich revelation that is contained in the Holy Scripture. Where else can we find you? If our own imaginations are idol factories, How can we know what is true and real about you unless we consult the one place that you have pointed out to us as the source of truth and life, and that is the Holy Scripture? Make us good students of it, we pray, for we are prone to wander. We are prone to leave the God that we love. We are prone to cast you into our own images and idols and deprive you of what is yours alone, our worship and service. We thank you that you are, in your word, the antidote to all the poison of idolatry, that when it is sapping us and misleading us and corrupting us, your word remains a sure and steady resource. And we are reminded that our feet are planted firmly on Jesus Christ our Lord and on the prophets and the apostles. So grant us every grace, we pray, as we make our way through this harrowing and difficult journey in the wilderness, keeping our eyes fixed on Zion, looking back to the wasteland of Babylon, but threatened, it seems, at every turn. You have promised us a complete salvation. Now grant us what you have promised, and grant us perseverance in our way. We thank you, our Father, that you have provided the means of grace, that in your wisdom, however weak they may seem to human beings, they are to us the power of God. The Word of God preached, prayer, the sacraments. So as we turn to the table of Jesus Christ, we give thanks for the great benefits represented to us there, and how those benefits are freshly and newly sealed and signified to us in the body and the blood. May we receive it with joy and thanksgiving, for we offer it back to you through Christ. Amen. At an important junction in Paul's letter to the Romans, he's thinking about Isaiah chapter 40. Oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God! How unsearchable are his judgments, and how inscrutable his ways! For who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor, or who has given a gift to him that he might be repaid? For from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be glory forever and ever. Amen. And after he pauses for this doxology, which he takes up Romans 40 and the greatness of God, his independence, his beauty, his glory, how unsearchable are his ways, he then turns to us and he says, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. We are saved in order to present ourselves in the true religion, a sacrifice on God's altar, not the kind that die and remain dead, but the kind that live and keep on living, so that we might be useful in our service to God and to one another. And I can only wonder, does Paul have this altar, if you will, in mind, when Christ, our great high priest, made his own body a sacrifice for us, a sacrifice unto death? God prepared a body for him, and he came into the world only to lay down his life in the service of God in order to reconcile us to himself. Here is sacrifice. Here is worship and service, not to the idols of this world, but to the living and the true God. So as we come to the table this morning, we come as a community so that it testifies to all of us simultaneously that we are God's loved and saved people, but we are now also the imitators of Jesus Christ, prepared to offer our own bodies in sacrificial service to one another. If you are not a Christian this morning, then this is nothing more than a few pieces of bread and a few little cuplets of grape juice or wine. And therefore, please don't come to our table this morning. It's the place of special communion between the Lord and his people, where by his word he separates that bread and that wine for a sacred purpose. But to all the rest who love the Lord Jesus Christ, come, renounce your idolatry and be refreshed at the altar of God, where Christ is presented as the once-for-all sacrifice for sin.